He died before he could tell anyone that he had built a house in the mountains. Years later, his wife received letters addressed to their son. Following the map, they climbed the rock and found the place where his voice could still be heard. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from. The wind carried a slow hum through the narrow street, where the houses all looked the same, their colors fading under years of Oregon rain. Mary Holden stood in the middle of her living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes, the kind that once promised new beginnings and now only whispered of departures. The smell of dust filled the air, mixed with the faint sweetness of old wood. A half-empty mug sat on the windowsill, the one that still said, "Firefighter's Wife," in cracked red letters. She had thought about throwing it away 100 times, but her hands could never do it. Some things clung to you like smoke. No matter how far you went, they followed. The house had grown quiet since the divorce. The laughter that once echoed down the hallway was gone. The nights had grown long, filled only with the ticking of the old wall clock and the sound of her son, Eli, turning in his sleep. John Holden had been gone for nearly 2 years now, first from the marriage, then from the world entirely. She still remembered the day the sheriff came to the door, hat in hand, with the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. "Ma'am," he'd said, "I'm afraid there's been an accident." Those words had carved themselves into her bones. He told her John had fallen from a trail somewhere deep in the mountains of Idaho. Alone. No witnesses. No answers. Mary had not cried that day. She'd stared past the officer's shoulder, at the maple tree in the yard, where John once hung Christmas lights, and all she could think was how strange it was that something so tall could break so silently. She hadn't realized until much later that she'd been holding her breath since then, living in small, shallow inhales, afraid to let life in again. Eli was 8 now, quiet like his father, but with a softness John had lost somewhere along the way. The boy barely spoke these days. He spent hours sitting on the back porch with his sketchbook, drawing mountains, rivers, and tiny houses balanced on cliffs. Once, when Mary asked why he always drew those, he said, "Because they're hard to reach." She didn't press further. Children had their own ways of carrying grief. That morning, as she sealed the last box of old photographs, a knock came at the door. The postman stood there, holding a small wooden package wrapped in brown paper, her name scrawled across it in uneven handwriting. "Been sitting at the post office a while," he said. "No return address." The box was light, yet something about it made her heart tremble. She carried it to the kitchen table and just stared at it for a long time. The paper was frayed, the corners softened with time. Finally, she untied the string and lifted the lid. Inside was a smaller box, made of wood, with a leather strap around it. Carved into the top were the words, "For my boy, when he's ready." Mary froze. Her fingers went cold. That handwriting, she would have known it anywhere. John's. The breath caught in her throat. She felt the world tilt slightly, as though time had bent just enough to let the past seep through. Inside the wooden box lay a stack of folded letters, tied together with a thin piece of rope. She could smell the faint trace of pine, smoke, and rain, the scent of every place John had ever gone to find peace. For hours she didn't move. She sat at the table, staring at the letters, terrified to touch them, as if they might vanish if she breathed too hard. When Eli came home from school, he saw the box and walked over silently. "What's that?" he asked. His voice was small, almost careful. "Something from your dad," she whispered. The boy looked at the letters for a long time, and then, without hesitation, untied the rope. He chose one at random and handed it to her. "Read it," he said. The first letter was dated a year before John's death. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Hey, buddy. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't give it to you myself. Don't be sad about that. Sometimes people don't get to finish their stories the way they plan to. But I want you to know about a place I found, a piece of sky that touched the ground. There's a mountain out here, and on top of it, I built something small. It's quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you remember you're alive. Someday, when you and your mom are ready, go there. You'll know it when you see it. Mary folded the letter back slowly. The words were simple, but they hit her like a wave breaking after a long calm. She read the second one, then the third. Each letter described fragments of the same place: a narrow valley, a bend in a river, an old dirt road hidden beneath moss and branches. John wrote of a cliff where the wind feels like forgiveness, and a view that makes you believe heaven might not be so far after all. For nights afterward, Mary couldn't sleep. She would sit at the kitchen table long after Eli had gone to bed, the letters spread before her like pieces of a map she was too afraid to finish. Her mind replayed memories she had tried to bury: the smell of smoke on John's jacket, the way his hands would tremble after long shifts, the distant look in his eyes when the sirens faded. He had saved strangers from burning houses, but couldn't save himself from the memories. When he left, she told herself it was selfishness. Now, reading his words, she wondered if it had been survival. One evening, while she read another letter aloud, Eli leaned over her shoulder and pointed to the edge of the paper. "That's a drawing," he said. Indeed, at the bottom of the page was a rough sketch of a mountain, with a line zigzagging upward and an X at the top. Beside it, John had written, "When you come, follow the river until you hear it disappear. Then keep going." The next morning, Mary found a folded sheet tucked between two envelopes. It was a hand-drawn map, crude but clear enough to trace. A series of landmarks: a crooked pine, a bend in the road, a ridge shaped like a sleeping bear. At the bottom were the words, "When you reach the silence, you'll find me." Mary sat in silence for a long time. The light from the window fell across the map, and for the first time in years, something stirred inside her, a feeling that wasn't sorrow, but something close to purpose. That night, she told Eli they were going on a trip. "Where?" he asked. "Somewhere your father wanted you to see." They packed lightly 2 backpacks, a tent, and John's old field jacket that still smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. The next morning, before sunrise, Mary loaded their few belongings into the old truck that hadn't moved since John died. The engine coughed and protested, but finally came alive, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. She looked at the house one last time, its windows blank and unwelcoming. There was no warmth left in those walls. She turned the key and drove away without looking back. The drive took 2 days. They crossed rivers and winding mountain roads, stopped at lonely gas stations where time seemed to have stopped decades ago. At night, they slept in motels that smelled of dust and pine cleaner. In the evenings, Eli would sit by the window, holding the map, tracing their route with his finger. "Do you think he really built a house up there?" he asked once. "If anyone could," Mary said softly, "it would have been your father." The further they drove, the thinner the air felt, not from altitude, but from distance. Civilization fell away behind them, replaced by the steady rhythm of tires over gravel and the whisper of the wind through the valleys. On the second afternoon, they entered a long, narrow canyon, the road hugging the edge of a river that shone like glass. Towering cliffs rose on both sides, their faces draped in green. It was beautiful, but it also felt sacred, like a place untouched by time. As dusk settled, they reached a dead end, where the road narrowed into a dirt path. Ahead stood a solitary ridge, smaller than the mountains around it but strikingly steep, its top hidden by mist. Mary turned off the engine. Silence fell, complete and consuming. Eli climbed out, craning his neck upward. "Is that it?" he whispered. Mary followed his gaze. The fading sunlight caught on a patch of green near the top. A hint of life against the stone. It looked impossible, unreachable, yet something in her chest told her this was the place. They set up a small camp near the base of the ridge. The night was colder than she expected. The river murmured below, and above them, the stars burned brighter than they ever did back home. Mary sat by the fire, reading one last letter. John had written, "When you come, don't rush. The road is steep but kind. Every step will take something from you. Fear, guilt, anger, and give you something in return. By the time you reach the top, you won't be the same. That's the point." The fire cracked, throwing brief sparks into the darkness. Eli had already fallen asleep inside the tent, his small hand clutching one of the letters. Mary stared into the flames, and for the first time since John's death, she allowed herself to imagine that he might still be somewhere. Not in body, but in everything that surrounded her. The river, the wind, the mountains. When the fire died down, she whispered into the night, "All right, John, we're here." And in the distance, carried faintly by the wind, came the echo of something that almost sounded like a reply. Morning crept over the valley slowly, spilling light across the mist that hung low above the river. The world was painted in silver and pale blue, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine. Mary woke before Eli, the chill biting her cheeks as she stepped outside the tent. The ridge loomed above them, no longer hidden by darkness. Now that daylight touched it, she could see the narrow path that wound upward in a lazy curve, carved by rain and time. It didn't look welcoming, but it felt alive. She boiled water for tea on a small stove, watching the steam curl upward and dissolve into the cold air. For a moment she stood still, listening. There was no hum of traffic, no voices, just the sound of the river and the faint call of a bird somewhere high above. It was a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt aware, as if the land itself was waiting for something. When Eli crawled out of the tent, his hair tousled and his eyes still heavy with sleep, she smiled. "You ready?" she asked. He nodded, clutching the folded map in his small hands. They left the tent behind, taking only what they needed, a backpack with food, water, a blanket, and the letters. The road began gently enough, covered in gravel and half buried by grass. Mary could tell it had not been used in years. As they walked, the sun rose higher, pushing away the mist and revealing the texture of the world around them. Moss glistening on rocks, ferns trembling under drops of dew, the occasional flash of a lizard darting into the underbrush. The further they went, the steeper the climb became. Soon, the soft earth turned to loose stone, and every step sent tiny echoes bouncing down the slope behind them. Eli walked ahead with the energy of someone who had been waiting his whole life for this moment. Every few minutes, he would stop to look back and point something out. A strange rock, a cluster of red berries, a bird circling far above them. Mary followed quietly, her breath growing shorter, but her resolve unshaken. The rhythm of the climb had a strange effect on her. With every step, something seemed to loosen inside her chest, as if each breath pushed a small piece of the past further behind. Around midday, they reached a sharp turn where the trail widened into a small clearing. The view opened up, showing the valley below in all its vastness, the ribbon of the river, the trees like patches of green smoke, the road they had driven the night before, now just a thin, forgotten line. Mary sat down on a flat rock, wiping sweat from her forehead. Eli sat beside her, pulling the map from his pocket. "We're almost halfway," he said, tracing his finger along the path. "See? This curve here, it matches." His voice was full of certainty. She nodded, watching him. "You really believe he made it up there, don't you?" He looked at her with the kind of quiet conviction that only children have. Of course he did. He said the road was kind. It wouldn't let him fall. Mary smiled faintly, though her heart clenched at the echo of John's words. The road is kind. She hadn't believed that when she first read it. Life had taught her that roads, especially the ones you didn't choose, were rarely kind. But as she sat there, feeling the wind touch her face, she realized that perhaps kindness didn't always mean ease. Maybe it meant forgiveness, the chance to keep moving even when you didn't think you could. They resumed their climb. The air grew thinner, the trees shorter. The world became sharper, stripped of distraction. At one point they came across a wooden post driven into the ground, the letters JH carved deeply into its surface. Beneath it, half buried in the dirt, lay an old compass. Its glass was cracked, but the needle still trembled toward north. Eli picked it up reverently, brushing the dirt away. "He was here," he whispered. Mary felt a rush of warmth and ache all at once. "Yes," she said softly. He was. As they continued, they began to notice more signs. Small stacks of stones, carefully balanced on one another, bits of rope tied to branches, and what looked like the remains of a small campfire, long cold. The presence of these things gave the journey a rhythm, as if they were following a trail of breadcrumbs left years ago, guiding them towards something meant to be found. After several hours, they reached another plateau. The sun was beginning to tilt westward, painting everything in honey and gold. They sat again, this time beside a fallen tree that served as a bench. Mary took a sip of water and leaned back, her eyes closed. Her body ached, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that told her she was alive. Eli broke the silence. "Mom, why did you and Dad stop liking each other?" The question came so suddenly, she almost dropped her bottle. She turned to him, seeing in his face not accusation, but simple curiosity. "It's not that we stopped liking each other," she said slowly. "It's that we stopped understanding each other." He frowned. "How can that happen?" Mary stared at the horizon where the valley melted into blue haze. "Your dad carried things he never talked about, things from the fires, from the people he couldn't save. It changed him, and I kept trying to bring him back to who he was before, but he couldn't go back. He was somewhere else." She hesitated, feeling her throat tighten, and I didn't know how to follow. Eli was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very softly, "Maybe he didn't want to go back. Maybe he just wanted you to see where he went." Mary looked at him, surprised by the calm wisdom in his voice. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Maybe you're right," she whispered. The last stretch of the path was the hardest. The road narrowed until they had to walk single file, gripping rocks for balance. The wind grew stronger, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. But with every step, they could feel they were getting closer. At last, as the sun dipped low, they reached the top of the ridge. There, nestled between two large stones, stood a small wooden house. It wasn't large or grand, just a cabin made of rough timber, its roof covered in moss, its windows fogged with dust. But it stood firm, solid against the wind, like something that had waited patiently for them. Mary's breath caught in her chest. Eli ran forward, stopping at the door. "Mom," he said, "there's a garden." She followed him around the side. Indeed, a small patch of land had been carefully tended rows of herbs, a few vegetables, wildflowers scattered between them. The soil was still dark and soft, as though someone had only recently touched it. Beyond the garden, a wooden bench faced the edge of the cliff. From there, the view stretched endlessly. The valley, the river, the faraway ridges fading into light. Mary walked to the door and pushed it open. It creaked softly. Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with ash and cedar. The room was simple. A bed made of wood, a table, a stove, and shelves lined with a few books and jars. Sunlight fell through the window, landing on the table where a notebook lay open. Dust motes floated above it like drifting memories. She stepped closer. The handwriting inside was unmistakable John's. She traced the letters with trembling fingers. If she ever reads one of my letters, she'll understand. I didn't leave to disappear. I left to build something that could hold the silence. A single tear fell onto the page. She closed the notebook gently, her heart full of both sorrow and peace. Eli moved quietly through the small room, examining everything with a kind of reverence. On the shelf, he found an old cassette player, the kind John used to keep in the garage. Taped to it was a note. For Mary. Mary's hands shook as she pressed the button. The machine crackled, then came to life with a faint hiss. "Hey, Mare," John's voice said, soft and familiar. "If you're hearing this, then you made it. I knew you would. I wanted to explain, but I never found the words. I wasn't running away. I was just trying to remember how to breathe without the sound of alarms. This place, it's quiet. It listens. I hoped someday you'd find it and see what I saw." Mary pressed her hand to her mouth, her breath trembling. His voice continued. "Tell Eli I love him. Tell him he doesn't need to be brave the way I was. He just needs to be kind. That's harder, but it lasts longer. And you, Mare, you were the one thing I never stopped missing." The tape clicked and went silent. Mary stood there, the sound of the wind slipping through the cracks of the cabin. Eli wrapped his arms around her waist. "He's not gone, Mom," he whispered. "He's right here." She held him close, feeling the weight of years lift from her shoulders. They stepped outside together, sitting on the bench that faced the endless valley. The wind moved gently through the garden, stirring the leaves. The light of the setting sun bathed everything in amber and gold. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence was not heavy now. It was full, like the pause before a song begins. Mary looked at her son and said quietly, "He didn't run from us. He was just trying to build something we could find." Eli leaned against her shoulder. "And we did," he said. As the last light faded, the valley fell into shadow. But up there, on the ridge, the world still glowed with the warmth of what they had found. Mary closed her eyes, feeling the wind brush against her face. It didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like breath, the kind that carries both endings and beginnings in the same gentle exhale. The morning after felt like a promise fulfilled. When Mary opened her eyes, the cabin was awash in soft gold, the air cool and thin but gentle. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she heard the quiet sounds outside, the steady rhythm of her son's footsteps on the soil, the rustle of leaves in the garden, and memory returned like sunlight spilling through clouds. She lay still for a while, listening to the calm, the kind she hadn't known for years. It was the kind of silence that filled rather than emptied, the kind that reminded her she was still alive. When she stepped outside, the valley below was wrapped in mist, glowing faintly in the new light. The garden looked alive, dotted with dew that glistened like scattered glass. Eli was crouched by the rows of plants, his hands buried in the dark earth. He looked up when he heard her. "Morning, Mom," he said, grinning, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "I think these are still growing." She knelt beside him, brushing the leaves with her fingertips. They were tender and green, impossibly alive despite the years that must have passed since John last touched them. The soil was soft, rich. Whoever had built this place had known how to make things last. They spent the early hours tending to the garden, working without speaking. Mary found tools in a wooden crate near the wall, rusted but usable, and set about trimming the overgrown edges. The rhythm of their hands moving through the soil, the scent of wet earth, and the sound of the wind moving through the trees made the world feel smaller, gentler. She could almost believe John was still here somewhere, watching quietly from the shadows, not as a ghost, but as part of the air itself. When they returned to the cabin, the small stove had cooled completely. Mary set it alight, the fire crackling softly, and put water on to boil. As the flames grew, warmth filled the room, pushing back the lingering chill. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a small pile of objects he had found on the shelves. A pocket knife, an old photo of their family, a folded piece of paper with a list of what John must have planted: parsley, thyme, mint, lettuce. He looked at her and said, "He didn't just build a house, did he?" Mary shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "He built a way to stay." They ate breakfast slowly, as if time had loosened its hold on them. The quiet felt like something sacred. Afterward, Mary stepped outside again, holding one of the last letters she had brought with her. She hadn't read this one yet. It was the only one addressed to her, not Eli. Her name was written on the envelope in John's familiar, steady handwriting. She hesitated before opening it, knowing whatever was inside would be the last bridge between them. The paper was rough against her fingers. "Mare," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you found it. I wanted to tell you this place isn't about running away. It's about coming back to what matters. When I built the cabin, I kept thinking of that night you told me you were tired of living in my silence. You were right. I didn't know how to come home to you, not in the way I should have. So I built this something that might speak for me when I couldn't anymore. If the world ever feels too loud, come here. Let it quiet you. Let it hold you. And if you stay long enough, maybe you'll hear what I couldn't say." Her hands trembled as she folded the letter back into its envelope. The ache that had once felt unbearable now softened into something different. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. The years they had lost could never be returned. Yet standing there, surrounded by what he had built, she realized that some love doesn't fade with absence. It changes form, finding new ways to speak. She found Eli sitting on the edge of the cliff, his legs dangling above the drop. The sun had climbed higher, and the valley was now visible in full, a sea of green and silver, the river below catching the light like liquid glass. She sat beside him, feeling the breeze pull gently through her hair. "You like it here," she said. He nodded. "It feels quiet, but not lonely." She smiled at that. "That's exactly what your father wanted it to feel like." For a while they simply sat there. Eli drew shapes in the dirt with a stick, and Mary let her eyes wander over the horizon. The world looked endless, but it didn't feel overwhelming. She thought about the years with John, the laughter that had once filled their home, the dinners that ended in silence, the slow crumbling of everything that had once been easy. She remembered the night he left, the way he had stood at the doorway, hands trembling as if holding something fragile. "I can't breathe here," he had said. "I need to find a place where I can remember who I am." Back then, she thought it was an excuse. Now she understood it was a confession. Later, while cleaning the shelves, she found another small wooden box beneath the bed. Inside were packets of seeds and a folded sheet of paper with the words, "Plant when ready." She smiled. The message wasn't just for John. It was for anyone who came after. She took the seeds outside, and together she and Eli dug small holes in the soil. The sun was warm on their backs, the air thin but clear. They planted the seeds carefully, one by one, pressing the earth over them as though sealing a promise. When they finished, Eli looked up at her. "Can we come back here again?" he asked. She brushed the dirt from her hands and nodded. "Not just come back," she said softly. "We'll keep it alive." The words surprised her, but as soon as she said them, they felt true. This place didn't belong to the past. It was a beginning, disguised as an ending. They spent the afternoon exploring the ridge. On the far side of the cabin, they found a narrow trail that led to a small clearing filled with wildflowers. From there, they could see even further, the river winding like a silver thread through the valley, disappearing into the horizon. The sight brought a calm that words could never carry. Eli lay on his back, staring up at the sky. "Do you think he can see us?" he asked. Mary didn't answer right away. She looked at the clouds drifting slowly across the blue and said, "I think he's part of everything that sees us." As the day began to fade, they returned to the cabin. The light shifted from gold to amber to deep orange, and long shadows stretched across the floor. Mary packed a few things, but not all. She left the stove clean, the bed neatly made, the notebook closed on the table. Before they locked the door, she placed the last letter. John's words to her beside the cassette player. It felt right to leave it there, where the air still carried his voice. That night, they didn't sleep inside. Instead, they spread a blanket outside the cabin and lay under the open sky. The stars burned fiercely, untouched by city light. The wind carried the scent of pine and smoke, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Mary held Eli close, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. He was warm, solid, alive. For years she had lived with the weight of loss pressing against her chest. Now, for the first time, she felt space inside her again, a quiet, gentle space where something new could grow. At dawn, the horizon turned pale pink, and the first light touched the roof of the cabin. Mary sat up and watched it, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Eli was still asleep beside her, his head resting on her arm. She thought of all the mornings she had woken in their old house, heavy with the feeling that something was missing. Now, on this ridge, where the world stretched wide and unbroken, she felt whole. When Eli stirred, she smiled and brushed his hair from his forehead. "Time to go, sweetheart," she said. He blinked up at her, reluctant to move. They packed their bags quietly. Before leaving, Mary walked to the edge of the cliff one last time. The valley was waking below, light spreading through the trees like water through roots. She took a deep breath, the kind that fills you all the way to the heart, and whispered, "Thank you, John." The descent was easier than she expected. The path that had seemed steep and treacherous now felt steady, familiar. Every turn, every stone, carried a memory of the climb, but also something new, a sense of return rather than departure. The air grew warmer as they descended, and soon they could hear the soft roar of the river again. When they reached the bottom, Eli looked back. The cabin was just a small dot now, framed by sunlight, almost unreal. "It looks smaller from here," he said. Mary smiled. "Things often do once you've carried them inside you." They stood there for a long moment, watching the ridge. The wind swept through the valley, carrying the scent of the mountain with it, a mixture of pine, earth, and something faintly sweet. It was the smell of peace. Mary placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. "Let's go home," she said. As they walked away, the sound of their footsteps faded into the whisper of the river. The ridge stood quiet behind them, the cabin hidden among the trees, its small garden waiting patiently for the seeds to grow. For the first time in years, Mary didn't feel the need to look back. She knew that the place would always be there, not just on the map or in the mountains, but in the quiet space between their hearts. By the time they reached the car, the sun was high, and the world ahead shimmered with light. Eli opened the door, still holding the compass he had found at the halfway point. It glinted in the sun, its needle steady, unwavering. Mary started the engine. The road stretched ahead, winding through the valley, carrying them forward. As they drove, she thought about how the world below the ridge would never look the same again. It wasn't that the place had changed, it was that she had. The silence she had feared for so long had turned into something else. Not emptiness, but space enough for life to move freely again. And as the mountains faded in the rearview mirror, she whispered words that were not for John, but for herself. "You didn't leave me," she said. "You showed me how to stay." Above them, the sky widened into an endless sweep of blue, the kind John had written about, where the earth seemed to touch the heavens. Mary reached for Eli's hand, and he squeezed back gently. The road curved forward, carrying them into the light, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel lost at all. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next one, and share this video with someone who still believes that every place holds a secret.